So you're thinking about moving to Port St. Lucie? Well, I'm going to give you the top 3 reasons you want to consider moving there. Stay tuned. Hello, I'm Alex Haigh with EXP and the Haigh Group of the Treasure Coast. Welcome to another episode of Hey Haigh Today. Okay, reason number 1 you want to consider moving to Port St. Lucie is the access to leisure and adventure activities. Well, what do I mean by that? I'm going to talk about the top 3. There's plenty of them. So there's golf, there's tennis, there's pickleball, there's kayaking, there's paddleboarding, there's fishing, all that kind of stuff, right? I'm going to get into the specifics. The top, I would say, is the access to top shelf golf courses. Now, when we talk about top shelf golf courses, I'm going to go over my favorite 3. Number 1 would be PGA Village. Now, the PGA Village has 3 world-class golf courses that are owned and run by the PGA of America. You got the Die course, you got the Wanamaker course, and you have the Ryder course, okay? These are all world-class golf courses that are really accessible to all of the people that live in Port St. Lucie. You're not more than a 30-minute drive away. They got a world-class practice facility there. Really great way to go out and spend the day at the PGA Village. Okay, so my number 2 favorite golf course, which lines with number 1 reason to consider moving to Port St. Lucie, is Fair Winds Golf Course. Now, Fair Winds Golf Course is a little off the beaten path. It's up in Fort Pierce, but one of the things that I really love about Fair Winds is there are no homes in the entire course. So you really get a feel for nature while you're out there. Again, because it's a little out of the way, it's one of my favorites. Obviously, you can tell I'm a golfer. It's a great value. It's a great golf course, and at the end of the day, you can really feel like you're out there in nature, which is one of the things I really like. You may like being around houses, but being at Fair Winds Golf Course is really an experience, and I highly suggest it. So the number 3 golf course that's one of my favorites, and remember, there's 14 public golf courses in St. Lucie County, I know because I'm a golfer again, is the Saints. Now, the Saints is run by the city of Port St. Lucie. It actually used to be the Sinner and the Saints. There were 2 golf courses there. They took away the Sinner and they just kept the Saints, but it's a great golf course. It's right centrally located in Port St. Lucie, great value, and it's a pretty wide open golf course, so you can kind of score there well, even if you're not that great a golfer like maybe some of us. So I would highly suggest the Saints in Port St. Lucie. Okay, moving on from golf courses, fishing. Stewart, which is just a little further south of Port St. Lucie, is actually the sailfish capital of the world. So you just move a little farther north into St. Lucie County and you have incredible fishing, right? So you have the Fort Pierce Inlet, which you can get very large boats out of. They bring container ships in there, so you got all the depth that you need. It's turquoise water. You have incredible offshore fishing in St. Lucie County, and you have inshore fishing. Now, when we talk about offshore fishing, that would be your mahi-mahi, and then you have tuna, you have snooker inshore and offshore. You also have cobia, you have ground fish with your flounder, your grouper, and all that kind of stuff. Because one of the reasons that the fishing is so great is that all along the southeast portion of Florida is the Gulf Stream. And with the Gulf Stream is a flow of water that kind of is a lot warmer, so you create this temperature gradient. And I'm not a big fisherman, but you kind of can tell that I know enough about it. You create this temperature variant and you get all kinds of different species of fish that are closer to shore. So you don't have to go like up in North Carolina. You have to take your boat an hour and a half to get anywhere close to being in good fishing. In Florida, 15-20 minutes you'd be in good fishing. Okay, so also with that fishing element, you do have the Bahamas. So think about another country being within about an hour and a half boat ride of where you live, and some of the best fishing and diving. Florida has great diving. Port St. Lucie has some good diving. The Bahamas has incredible world-class diving. Literally, you've got to go right across the Gulf Stream as long as it's a good day out, or unless you have a bigger boat and you can deal with a lot of rough seas. And you're going to go over to the Bahamas, and it is a whole nother world over there as far as it's not fished out. There's conch, there's lobster, all that kind of stuff that you can get literally an hour and a half, 2 hours away. You can make a day trip of going out of the Fort Pierce Inlet in Port St. Lucie, going over to the Bahamas and catching all the tuna, mahi, lobster, conch, all that kind of stuff. So that's why Port St. Lucie, I think, for the fishing is one of the best reasons also to consider moving to Port St. Lucie. I'm going to talk to you about my top 3 parks or recreation areas that are are in St. Lucie County that I think you're going to be able to find all the hiking, biking, canoeing, fishing, and all that you're thinking about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Savannah Preserve State Park. Now, what the cool thing about Savannah Preserve State Park is that it's located right off of Walton Road, which is very accessible to that eastern side of St. Lucie County. You could also just hop right over to one of the incredible beaches, which we're going to talk about later. But the Savannah Preserve State Park has 10 miles of coastal reserve, all right? So what that is it basically kind of has a little feel of the Everglades. So you guys know that the Everglades are a big deal down here in Florida. Well, the Everglades are basically a wetland reserve, right? So you can go kayaking there, you can go hiking there, the birding, the aviary is incredible. Check out the Savannah State Park Reserve. I think you're gonna like it. All right, so the second park that I want to talk about is the Halpatioke Regional Park. Now the Halpatioke Regional Park is kind of on the southwest section of Port St. Lucie. What you're gonna have there is you're gonna have more of your mountain biking trails, you're gonna have your hiking trails, you're gonna be able to look at your birds and all that kind of stuff, but they also have soccer fields there, baseball fields. It's a beautiful park. Go check out the Halpatioke Regional Park. So the number 3 is the Oxbow Eco Center. I'm talking about 225 acres of preserve. They have 3.5 miles of mountain biking trails, hiking trails. They got the Eco Center where you can learn about the flora and fauna, all the plants and animals that live here in South Florida. You can go in there and kind of, some of them are taxidermy, so they're stuffed animals and so forth, but you really get a sense for how large those animals, what they look like. So I'd really highly suggest the Oxbow Eco Center. All right, so the number 2 reason that you want to consider moving to Port St. Lucie is the access to international airports. We have 4 international airports that are within 1 to 2 hour drive, depending on where you live in Port St. Lucie. So you live in northern Port St. Lucie, you got Orlando International Airport. That's going to be about an hour and 15-minute drive. You can fly anywhere in the world from Orlando International Airport. You could also be only 2 hours to West Palm, which is our second. West Palm International, my personal favorite, because it's very easy to fly in and out of West Palm International. It's a little bit of a smaller hub, but it is an international airport. Number 3, a little bit further south, is Fort Lauderdale. Everybody knows Fort Lauderdale, spring break, all that kind of stuff. Well, they also have an international airport in Fort Lauderdale. For most areas of Port St. Lucie, it's going to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic. So the 4th is going to be Miami. Now, Miami is really going to be either kind of Orlando or Miami if you're flying to Europe or Asia or something like that, or unless you want to get connecting flights. But there are direct flights out of Orlando, direct flights out of Miami for those international flights that are going to take you a little further away. So to have 4 international airports within a 1 to 2 hour drive, I think is one of the really incredible reasons and one of the really big reasons that you want to consider moving to Port St. Lucie. All right, so the number 3 reason that you want to consider moving to Port St. Lucie is the access to our incredible world-class beaches, right? We have 8 that I put out on the map. There's all kinds of little ones off of it. There's 8 named beaches in St. Lucie County. And here's the deal. They are all public beaches. What does that mean? It's a big deal because you don't have to pay to actually go to the beach. There's a lot of places in Florida, believe it or not, where you're going to have to park your car, you're going to have to put money in a meter while you're laying on the beach. Also, you're going to have to find a parking spot. This is not going to happen to you at all in St. Lucie County. You might have to hunt around a little bit for a parking lot depending on the beach that you go to, but you have incredible beaches. And I'm about to go over the top 3 that I think you want to consider checking out. Number 1, we talk about wants and needs. I got a little dog. I don't know if you guys have seen me in some of my videos. His name's Bruiser. Bruiser loves Walton Rocks. So that would be my number 1 because Bruiser lights up like a Christmas tree when he gets out onto Walton Rocks. It's an off-leash beach. So all the dogs are just running. It's outdoor. You got the sea air. You got the water crashing in. It's not crowded at all. Me and Bruiser, we highly, highly recommend Walton Rocks. All right, so number 2 favorite beach is Waveland. It's a little south of Walton Rocks. The great thing about Waveland is it has a lifeguard. If you have a kid or you're concerned about rip currents or that kind of thing, it's nice having a lifeguard there. Very easy access and it's a beautiful beach. So I suggest Waveland as my second, but again, all of these are beautiful. All right, so the number 3 top beach that I would say, and again, I'm a beach guy, so I love all beaches, is South South Beach Park. It's located up near Fort Pierce. One of the things that I really love about South Beach Park is the further north that you go, kind of the more turquoise the water gets. South Beach Park is right in the middle of that turquoise water. You got the boats coming in, so you have action there. You got walking distance to downtown Fort Pierce. You got biking going up and down. You got people running. There's a lot of activity. It's not like South Beach in Miami, but South Beach Park up by Fort Pierce, definitely one of my favorite beaches. Go and check it out amongst all the other beaches. And again, they're all incredible. It's tough to boil it down to 3, but those are my top 3. All right, so if you got a pro, you got to always have a con. Here are our cons of living in Port St. Lucie. And I'm going to be honest, number 1 is it's a little quiet. Remember, AARP, top 10 counties to live in the United States. Part of the reason that retirees want to move there is because it's quiet. Now, that being said, there's plenty of shopping and all that kind of stuff. But if you're into the nightlife kind of stuff, Port St. Lucie, probably not for you. The number 2 con of living in Port St. Lucie, if you're considering it and you want absolute fine dining just around the corner, Port St. Lucie is probably not the place for you. What I mean by that is, when we talk about right around the corner, if you go to West Palm, you go to Fort Lauderdale, you go to Miami, within 10 minutes you can go to Indian, or you could go to Mediterranean, or you could go to Greek, or what have you. Port St. Lucie doesn't really have that density. Ultimately, if you're looking for that fine dining experience, if you want it within, 10 or 15 minutes, probably not for you. You can go south, go into Stewart. There's some incredible restaurants in Stewart, incredible restaurants down in West Palm. And it's not like they're terrible restaurants, but again, I'm talking about that Michelin 5-star experience. Probably not going to find it in Port St. Lucie. Actually, not probably. You're definitely not going to find that in Port St. Lucie. I'm going to give one caveat to that. I have to give a caveat to it. People are going to say, well, what about Kyle G's? Kyle G's does have a beautiful oceanfront restaurant, Kyle G's Seafood, on the beach. It's in southeast St. Lucie County. So again, what I said was fine dining within 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. You're going to have to drive a little bit further. Kyle did open up another restaurant called Oak and Ember, which is in St. Lucie County. It is about as good as you're going to get for food, farm to table. Kyle does a great job. But again, if you're looking for, Mediterranean, you're looking for Greek, you're looking for Indian, all kind of within that 5 to 10 minute range, it's just not there. But Kyle G's does a great job of really giving the community that excellent food and great service for a great price. All right, so the number 3 con of living in Port St. Lucie, and I kind of alluded to it with reason number 2, the fine dining, close fine dining. Number 3 is Port St. Lucie is a little spread out. It's a very rural county. It's not super urban like West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, so forth. So everything's a little more spread out. So A of all, if you're looking for that downtown area that we can walk down to. Now, I'm going to move on in another episode here. We're going to talk about tradition. There is a lot of walking in that tradition, but ultimately the county is very spread out. So you're going to probably have to get into the car. You might have to drive, it's not going to have to drive 2 hours, but you're going to have to drive 20, 30 minutes. Again, for that golf course, for the Hell Patioki. If you want a state park that's got 225 acres, you got to expect it's not going to be right in the middle of a city. So Port St. Lucie is a little more spread out. If you're looking for that access where you can just walk to things right off the bat, to that dining, to that park, and so forth, Port St. Lucie might not be for you. Well, I hope that this video gave you a really good insight into the top 3 reasons to consider moving to Port St. Lucie. I hope it also gave you the top 3 reasons to consider maybe Port St. Lucie isn't for us. If you have any questions on the Port St. Lucie or the Treasure Coast, remember, Hey Haigh Today is a channel dedicated to all things Treasure Coast. So if you want to know about leisure activities, you want to know about dining, please give us a call, smoke signal, text us, email us. We're here to serve. And please remember, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button below. Until the next time, thank you for watching this episode of Hey Haigh Today. Have a great day.